Hello, and welcome to ConTinual, the never-ending convention. Today, we have four wonderful Indigenous writers here to discuss their Indigenous stories. Maggie Blackbird, Marcie Rendon, Drew Hayden Taylor, and David Heska Wanbli Weiden. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you.
We're so glad you're joining us today. Okay, would you tell our viewers a little bit about yourself and your work, starting with you, Maggie?
I'm Maggie Blackbird. I'm an Ojibwe from Couchiching First Nation. I write romance starring Indigenous people of Canada, and it's good to be here.
We're so glad to have you.
You
David?
need to say more?
If you want to say more, you can say more. Anyway, David, what about you?
Oh, hey, everybody. I'm David Heska Wanbli Weiden. I'm an enrolled citizen of the Sicangu Lakota Nation, and I am a crime writer, is how most people describe me, and my most recent work is Winter Counts, and it's a real pleasure to be here.
Glad to have you. And I do believe that Winter Counts was up for multiple awards this year.
It is, and in fact, I just found out that I did not win one tonight, and so that's how it goes. So I chose not to attend the ceremony, but I do wish them well. It's going on right now, and so I'm with you guys instead, having a much better time. So
thank you. Drew?
My name is Hayden Taylor, and I am what you call a contemporary storyteller. I work in so many different genres and mediums. I'm a playwright. I write novels. I write nonfiction. In my novels, I've written a vampire novel. I wrote a magic realism. I did a collection of Indigenous science fiction, and I just finished. I'm waiting to sell a Indigenous horror novel, and I write a lot of comedy.
Oh, cool. Comedy is good. I'm good with comedy. And Marcie, what about you?
Bonjour. I am citizen of the White Earth Nation here in Minnesota, in the middle of the continent, and I too write. What I say is I'll write anything that pays. Most recently, I'm doing crime novels, and I've done children's picture books, educational books, plays, poetry, songs for classical composers. And I would love to write a romance, but I just cannot seem to figure out the genre. So I'm looking forward to reading Maggie's work and hearing what you do.
Cool. You say you've you write everything they'll pay you for. I can really sympathize with that. What drew you? What did you intend when you started out to write in multiple genres, or did you have a focus on one particular genre?
So I've been writing as long as from the time I learned how to write, but I don't have a like a degree or anything in English or writing or anything like that. And so when I was writing, I was just writing anything and everything. Mm-hmm. And when I made the decision to make my living as a writer, and when I made that decision, I had to take anything that paid. I was doing journalism, poetry, plays, the songs for composers. So it just it was because I'd made the decision to make my living as a writer that kind of forced me to really basically write anything. Like I do profiles for agencies, year-end reports, that kind of thing. But like I love writing the crime novels. That's what I want my focus to be. Mm-hmm. But you can get paid to write children's books too.
What drew you to crime novels?
I think that as Native people, there is so much trauma and drama in our lives and in the world around us that there's a it's a way to resolve some of the internal conflict, not just for myself, but for people, Native people in general.
Mhm.
I mean, when you look at people's favorite Netflix shows or television shows, it's the crime,
Mhm.
you know, so there's something about crime that pulls us in.
Mhm.
And then I can resolve some of the stuff
Mhm.
that doesn't necessarily get resolved in real life.
Yeah. So basically, one of the questions I had prepped for this thing was, we're always told to write what we know, but we don't frequently. We write what we see. And yet what I'm hearing is that your affection for crime novels and your desire to write what you know were just sort of a natural meshing that went forward.
Probably. And it's fascinating. I mean, I grew up real rural in the, up in the woods. And so there were things that happened that never got resolved.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody got killed, never got resolved. So, somebody disappeared, never got resolved. They ran away with the circus, or not the circus, but the county fair, And so there was always that. And then you make up stories. I'm sure that everybody here, just like as soon as any little thing pops up and all of a sudden you're making a story up in your head about what happened, why it happened, who did what. And writing is a way to answer some of those questions.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool. Drew, you also have this breadth of genres, etc. Did you start out wanting to write fiction? Did you start out going towards journalism? Did you have one genre or style of writing that was your North Star that you were always aiming for?
Well, ever since I was a kid, I'd always wanted to be a writer, because one of the things I think everybody here can agree with is one of the great things about being a writer is you create a universe. And I discovered as a young kid growing up on the reserve that I had more control over the universe I created than the universe I lived in. And I kind of liked that. So I wanted to be a writer, but I was actively dissuaded from being a writer. My grade 11 English teacher told me there's no point in being a writer. You can't make a living at it. And my mother said, why do you want to be a writer? It's not going to get you anywhere. Right. And I understand where my mother's coming from. My mother's first language was Anishinaabe. She'd spent 30 years cooking, cleaning for white people. So I kind of understood where she was coming from. So I gave up wanting to be a writer. But it's one of these interesting cases of I didn't track my art down. My art tracked me down. About 10 years later, in my mid-teens, series of circumstances, I found myself in a position for writing an episode of a very popular Canadian television show. Because I was Native, a third of the cast was Native. I submitted some story ideas just for the hell of it. They bought it, they shot it, and it was a season ender. And suddenly I was writing for television. 2 years later, I got asked to be the writer in residence for Canada's premier Indigenous theatre company called Native Earth Performing Arts. Having never written a play before in my life, suddenly I was a playwright. I started being asked to write articles and essays for newspapers. I started doing that. So novels were actually last in my evolution as a writer. And so my very first novel was called The Night Wanderer, which was a Native vampire novel. And for me, it's more of a case of, yes, to a certain extent, write what you know, but it's for me, it's write what I would want to read. Because something I referred to as the contemporary Native literary renaissance. In the mid and late 80s, all these novels, plays, poetry were coming out of the First Nations community. And the vast majority of them were dark, depressing, bleak, sad, and angry. Most of the characters were either oppressed, depressed, or suppressed. And this made perfect sense, because when an oppressed people get their voice back, they want to write about being oppressed. Thompson Highway has this great line that he likes to use: before the healing can take place, the poison must be exposed. So there's this entire flood of books dealing with the dysfunctional aspect of the First Nations community. But my path was kind of different, because I bumped into an elder from a reserve in Alberta who said, in his opinion, for Native people, humor was the WD-40 of healing.
Mhm.
I don't know if they have WD-40 down there, but it's a lubricant.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, it's said down here in the U.S. that it's either duct tape or all the world's problems can be solved by duct tape and WD-40.
Well,
Duct tape if it's
I thought that line was so cool. I thought it was T-shirt worthy.
yes.
So I decided I was more interested, as I said, the preceding line of Thompson Highway's line about before the healing can take place, the poison must be exposed. So many writers were exposing that poison, and far better writers than me. I was more interested in humor is the WD-40 of that healing. And I've been to about 150 First Nation communities and reserves and reservations across Canada and the States. And every community I've been to, I've been greeted with a laugh, a smile, and a joke. So I started writing more humor, incorporating humor into what I was doing, because to me, that is the essence of the Indigenous community. And I started, my first novel was a Native vampire novel, because at that time, at least to me, I don't know again, other places, I had not read, heard of, or even thought anybody would have written a Native vampire novel. And I wanted to do it because I was told there's no such thing as Native vampires. Well, there is now. And then I wrote another novel, which was about a magic realism, when I didn't even know what magic realism was. I did that, and then I did a collection of Indigenous science fiction short stories, and so on and so on. So I basically write what I would want to read.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Maggie, okay, were you always laser focused on romance, or did you try some other genres along the way? And what prompted you to bring Indigenous heroes and heroines or Indigenous protagonists into the center stage in your romances?
I have always been focused on romance. I think I said in the last video, it started when I was about 12 or 13. My older sister passed me Joanna Lindsay's latest paperback, and I got the romance bug. I was bitten really big. And it was something I spend a lot of time just reading. I'm a big reader. I always say I'm a reader first and a writer second. Big fan of reading. And I had a demanding job that took me basically all over the treaty area, down in southern Ontario, all those places. And I just wanted to decompress in my hotel room. So I would write romance stories. That's how it all started.
Can you write at home now, or do you need to go to a hotel?
I can basically write anywhere. I could even be in the middle of a big wedding, and I could just sit there with my laptop and write. I can basically write.
Cool.
Wherever,
now,
yeah.
It basically, one of the things that the pandemic showed me was how addicted I'd gotten to writing in coffee shops. That I suddenly couldn't. So when you said you were writing in hotels, I was going, oh dear, I hope it didn't become such a habit that it was hard to break. But obviously
No, it was nice. The meeting would end, and I go back to my hotel room and just to unwind. I would just started writing the series, about a bunch of motorcycle people. Where it came from, I don't know, but.
But what prompted you to, usually we are told to write to the market, but you're doing something, you were doing something new. You were bringing in Indigenous peoples into your stories. What brought it there? Was it basic to satisfy, were these stories for you initially when you were writing in the hotel room?
They were basically, yeah, for me. I just kept thinking that, I was aware of all the different fiction out there and nonfiction with Indigenous people, but it's really hard to find in romance, especially in contemporary times. You don't see a lot of contemporary novels, romance novels, with everybody's running around the reserve and communities happening. You don't see that. So I just thought, well, I'm gonna write it then, and if it sells, it sells. So and a publisher picked it up, and I went from there. So
Very cool.
good.
Very cool. Okay, David, was mystery and suspense always your lodestar?
No, I kind of backed into this a little bit differently than the others on the panel here. I did not grow up on the reservation. I grew up in the city. Now I would spend summers on the Rosebud Reservation in South Dakota, where my mother was raised, but I grew up primarily in the city. But I grew up, obsessed with books, as I'm sure everybody here is, or anybody watching, but my family was, there's no nice way to say it, fairly impoverished. And so neither of my parents graduated from college. And in fact, my parents split up. We were homeless for a time. And so, when my mother did get a home, it was bill collectors. It was a fairly rough childhood financially, although I found my escape in books. And so when I was growing up, I wanted to write, but I did the thing that a lot of poor kids do, which is I need to get a job that will pay. And so I became a lawyer, which I did not care for. I did work for a number of years. I've done some work for various Native causes. I worked for the ACLU briefly here in the States, and it just was not my thing. And so I became a teacher. So I still, in my day job, I teach Native American studies. And so I would write these really dry and boring scholarly articles that, maybe 3 people read if I was lucky, and one of them was, probably my cousin, and so I've been writing about the legal issues in a scholarly sense for a number of years. And then about 10 years ago, I said, wait a minute, it's time for me to stop writing about these issues in a scholarly sense and do what I wanted to do all along. And so I enrolled at the Institute of American Indian Arts in their Master of Fine Arts program in Santa Fe. And I really threw myself into learning how to write fiction so I could take these issues that I've been writing about in a scholarly sense and try to write about them in a fictional sense. And so it's so much more fun. And so that's kind of how I backed into it. So I'm kind of, I think, the newbie here in terms of writing. I've only been writing seriously for about 10 years. I do have a children's book out called Spotted Tail that I had a lot of fun writing. And I do write creative nonfiction. I publish some essays and such. And I want to try my hand at a play. I hear everybody here is like, I write plays. I just did a virtual residency at the MacDowell Colony. I think they just call it MacDowell now. And I met some really cool playwrights at this residency we did. And Larissa Fasthorse, who's a really cool Native playwright. And so I've started reading plays and I'm like, oh yeah, I want to try this, but it's daunting to me because you have to stay in scene in a play for a long time, right? I mean, not
necessarily. You can go in and out as frequently as you want.
Well, the plays I'm reading, I mean, I'm used to quick cuts. I mean, I'm not going to do like a 10-page scene, but the plays I'm reading right now, these scenes go on for pages and pages. And I'm like, oh man, you talk about staying in scene. I don't know if I can do that. My readers are going to get bored. And so I'm going to give it a try, and I'll have to read some of y'all's plays just to find out how to do it. So.
Very cool.
I wrote a play with one scene 8, character running across the stage, screaming at the top of his lung, fade to black, and on to a new scene.
I'll try. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm the first to admit it. Okay. So.
Okay. Well, basically, I'm hearing crime, I'm hearing mystery, and I'm also hearing lawyer, David. So how do you, bring your experiences to the page? Do you draw from your own life experiences, or do you just go, oh no, I am not going to go anywhere near what I personally experienced. I'm going to go run away and do a lot of research.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Okay. Well, so my novel Winter Counts is about a private vigilante on the Rosebud Reservation. So I myself have not been a vigilante who beats people up for money.
Sure.
I'm not ruling it out, I'm not ruling it out, someday, but I haven't done that yet. But I did bring in my own experiences, spending a lot of my youth on the Rosebud Reservation. And there's a 14-year-old character in the book named Nathan. And I have two kids, one's 13, one's 16. So I brought in my own experiences there. But I did bring in my knowledge of the criminal justice system into the book. And I do have a new character. I've written a short story with a new character who's a native lawyer, a down on his luck native lawyer, called Griff Germain. That's a short story that I just sent off. It's going to be in something called Denver Noir. There's a publisher called Akashic. Akashic,
Oh,
I don't know how to
yes.
say it. Yeah. And so they have a new volume coming out called Denver Noir. So I introduced a new character that's probably closest to me, like, down on his heels, native lawyer set in Denver. So if any of my personal experience made it onto the page, I would say it's on that character.
Okay. What about you, Marcie? Has your how have you brought your experiences, both as an Indigenous person, as a woman, as a writer, onto the page?
I don't know exactly.
There's no wrong answer.
Yeah, the things that I write are pretty character driven. And so, so my first book, the first crime novel was this one, Murder on the Red River. And I had given up writing crime. I'd written 3, failed. And so I was trying to write some kind of version of a romance, and I was failing at that. And the main character, Cash, literally showed up, and she started like, rah, 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 rah. And as long as I was writing what she was, blah, 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 it was working, and I could tell that it was working. And so I don't, I'm Native, I'm female, I have kids. I don't, it's like, I don't know. I guess I don't think too much about it. Like when a story hits, I can tell that it hits. And as long as I'm writing, I think Drew said, stories, things that I would want to read. And I can tell when I'm writing, if I hit a spot where, okay, I'm going off here trying to write for somebody else, as opposed to what would make me continue to read the book. It's hard to separate for me how much,
Yeah.
In fact, in the Murder on the Red River, I was writing a crime story. That's what I wanted to do. That's what I was trying to do. And the publisher there's one line in there where it says, and she never saw her mother again. And the editor said, nobody's going to believe that. I said, what do you mean nobody's going to believe that? It happens all the time. Like why would, and she said, and so then we talked about the foster care and the scooping and all of that happened. And she said, so you have a whole other storyline going in here that I wasn't even aware that was in there, because I was just writing the story. Yeah.
Yeah, the things that we live with, we don't always recognize are part of a story or are a story to
Right.
people who do not share our experiences. And I grew up military, and I always thought that was normal.
Right.
You just don't think about it. You do not think about it. So yeah, I understand what you're trying to say here. So Maggie, what about you? How do you infuse your romances with your own experiences?
It's not so much my own experiences. If I wrote about my own experiences, people would fall asleep. I'm not that exciting of a person. So it's basically the characters who run with it. That's it in a nutshell, If experiences do crop up at the back of my mind, it's always something that comes from the character. Like I said, when I sit down and do the first draft, it's basically me taking dictation for these characters.
Yeah.
That's it.
Cool. Very cool. I like that, you know, because you know when something's working is when the characters are running away with you. Totally. Hey, Drew, what about you? You know, you were talking about how when you would go to tribal villages and meetings, the first thing you would hear was laughter. Is that what you're trying to bring in with your fiction? In
Yes, I
addition,
usually in my plays are usually a lot more humorous, but there's a lot of humor in my novels too, because as I said, to me, that's what's allowed Indigenous people to survive a lot of several hundred years of colonization. So I try to incorporate that. I don't even try to incorporate it. When I was growing up, I was raised by my mother and my aunts, basically, and there was always laughter. It was my normal default position is big boisterous female laughter, and so putting that into a play, a novel, whatever, is quite natural. It's like it belongs there. I don't have to make it up or put it there.
so if you know, when we all write for people who are not us, you know, we write for ourselves. We write the stories we want to see. We write the characters we want to see in the stories, and frequently those characters are us. But you know, every writer, we cannot control what the readers are going to do with our story or how they will view it. But what do you want people who are not you, people of other identities, to take away from your writing? Drew, we'll start with you since we just.
Well, one of the things I stress in a lot of my work, I'm an Anishinaabe, born and raised on the Curve Lake First Nation. And at time of contact in 1497, it's assumed that there were 50 to 60 separate languages spoken in Canada. That's like discovering Europe. Europe has 50 to 60 separate languages, and there's no one Europe anything, and there's no one Canadian Indigenous anything. So when I do a lot of my work, I stress the fact that I'm not giving you the Indigenous perspective on anything. I'm giving you the Anishinaabe perspective on something. So that's sort of, I try and stress that in a lot of the work that I do. So yeah.
So basically, to talk about I'm going to mangle it, Anishinaabe perspective.
Anishinaabe, yeah.
Anishinaabe perspective, and also to emphasize the magnitude, scope, and diversity of the First Nations, not just in Canada, but
yeah. And I mean,
the US.
The usual things too of dispelling stereotypes and creating an understanding, building bridges. I mean, all that stuff. I mean, for the longest time, up until fairly recently, the dominant culture, depending where you were, was completely unaware there were still Native people alive on this continent. Secondly, they were completely unaware that we had a sense of humor, you know, the stoic Indian, all that sort of stuff. So part of what I've done with my comedies or whatever is try to demonstrate and illustrate that actually the best way to put it is, in terms of the dominant culture and Indigenous people, there are actually more similarities than differences, but those differences are very, very important and need to be addressed.
Okay, cool. Maggie, what do you want people who are not you, who do not share your experience, to take from your work?
So that's a good question, because I never really thought about what I want people to take away from my work. I just want them to have an understanding that you know, on the reserve, you know, we're not much different. We have romance, we have marriage breakups, we go through divorces. We have our own, we're not living in this perfect dreamy world. We have our own problems at the reserve level too. You know, and in my one book, I have the two families feuding over religion and over the Indigenous culture, the Ojibwe culture. That was, you know, almost destroyed through the residential schools, and that's basically what's happening in that series. So, and just have an awareness of the own issues that we have on a more personal level at the reserve level. So, and there's been a lot of good feedback, which I'm really happy about. I have a lot of I have more writers that are non-native than native, or readers that are non-native than native in the romance community.
Cool.
So it's great.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Mhm.
Marcie, what do you want people to take away? People who do not share your experience, what do you want them to take away from your work? Specifically your fiction, because when you're writing, nonfiction, usually you're sort of stuck with specifications you can't get out of.
Yep. No, with the novels, what I'm writing for is I just want people to enjoy reading the crime novels the same way that I enjoy reading crime novels. I know that both of the books are being used in university to in social studies classes, in women's studies classes. I mean, I went to one class. I mean, I've got a few marks where I read but I mean, one woman had the whole thing. It was like every page she was pulling something out to study. It was like, yeah. So I don't know. I'm not trying to educate anybody. I'm not trying to teach something. I'm trying to write crime novels that will sell and that people will enjoy.
Cool.
That's my goal.
That's a worthy goal. Enjoyment, reading. That's what, like humor, is what gets us through the hard times.
Yes.
David, what about you? What do you want folks to take from your work?
Well, I'll just echo a lot of what's been said here. What I want people to do is to be glued to the page, and they stay up all night, and it's like, oh, I missed work because I had to know how winter counts ended. That's I think what we all want, and that's obviously my goal. But having said that, I mean, I do try to sneak in some things that I think non-native people and even some native people don't know about. A lot of people don't know about this legal issue that I write about in the book, the Major Crimes Act, which I'm not going to bore everybody here with today. There are lots of issues down here in America, that laws that really disadvantage native peoples on reservations and elsewhere. And a lot of people don't know about this, lots of other things. I find that non-native people don't know about IHS and the healthcare system that we have that sometimes fails. There are a lot of things that I think, I think there are a lot of things that people can take away with, but I also want people to get, just like Drew and Marcie and Maggie have said, I want them to get a sense of what it is to be native, what it's like to interact. We're different in some ways, but we're similar in so many ways. Now, having said that, I am writing for native people in a way. The comment that I get a lot when I talk to book clubs, and I've spoken to 4 dozen book clubs over the last year, and they're like, we want a glossary because you threw in some Lakota words and you didn't define them. We want a glossary. And I'm like, well, there's this thing, it's called Google, and context, And so I appreciated that they wanted it, but I felt that for the truth of what I was trying to express, I did have to keep some things very native centric. And there are a lot of jokes in my book that only native people are going to get. I have one character in there called Snagmore that Stephen Graham Jones, my friend, thought that is just the funniest thing that he's ever heard of. There are a lot of, and Bethany Yellowtail, I mentioned that a few times, so there are a lot of things in there that are really just a little wink and a nod to native people. But I want people overall to have a good time, but also maybe get a little sense of the legal obstacles and political obstacles that we natives face down here in the States.
Mm-hmm. Cool. It's interesting that you mentioned Stephen Graham Jones, because the next question is actually a nod to him, because he wrote an article that was linked to Tor.com recently. And he mentioned that he would rather people ask in panels, who do you read? Generally, and that resonated with me, because I have found that you can tell a lot about what kind of writing a writer does by who their favorite authors are. And I think that would help give people a sense of your writing if y'all told us some of your favorite authors. They can be old authors, they can be current authors. There are no wrong answers here. These are just, who are the writers that inspire you and that you go to for pleasure or for to get out of a plot problem. I mean, every time I screw up my lead, I pull out the Continental Op from Dashiell Hammett. And I don't write mystery, by the way. I should say this. So, David, Take it away with that.
Yeah, I did read that article. Stephen is a friend of mine. We talk and we've hung out in person a few times because he's in Boulder, I'm in Denver. We're like maybe 40 miles apart. And Stephen is a great guy. And I did read that article and I thought he had some excellent points in there. Now when I am asked my favorite writer, which I get asked a lot, or whom should, who would you recommend? I do feel that it's my duty to prioritize the Native community. In fact, I've given Marcie, I've given you a shout out, I think 3 or 4 times lately, because lately I've been given something of a microphone, given that I've been nominated for the Edgar and the Anthony and a lot of the big awards here in the States. And I always get asked that question. And I feel it's my duty to, and my desire to turn on folks to other Native writers. So I take Stephen's point completely, and it's a fair one. But I always mention Native writers that I want people to know about. So I'll mention a few right now. Marcie, I've already mentioned you a number of times, but if you don't know her books, they are fantastic. You're welcome. But, I'll just mention a couple. So if anybody's watching this later and you want to learn more about Native issues, a book that I always recommend is The Heartbeat of Wounded Knee by my friend David Troyer. It was nominated for the National Book Award. It's nonfiction. It's history, but it's readable. It's fantastic. And also, my friend Kelly Jo Ford has a wonderful book of short stories called Crooked Hallelujah. It's fantastic. And then probably one of my best friends in the writing world is Brandon Hobson, Cherokee citizen. I blurbed his book, The Removed. It's fantastic. He was nominated in fiction for the National Book Award a few years ago. And this one is even better. So anyway, those are just some of the authors that I love and I am happy to shout out.
Okay, great. Drew?
I don't get as much of an opportunity to read as what I should be reading. Right now, I'm blurbing 2 books. So it's like whatever happened lands on my desk is what I'm reading at those particular times. But much like David said, yes, I try and support the Indigenous writing community. I'm a big fan up here in Canada of Tom Thompson Highway as a playwright, Tom King as both his fiction and his nonfiction, Richard Van Camp, I'm a big fan of his, and in the non-Indigenous world, I'm a big fan both like Stephen King. He just tells a good story. He needs an editor severely, but he knows how to weave a good story. And other people, some you've never heard of, probably John Wyndham. I'm a big, because I do a lot of science fiction stuff. And just because of the work I do, I don't get a chance to follow all these authors because I'm always being tossed books to read. So I'll have to leave it at that.
Okay, great. Hey, like I said, there are no wrong answers here. Maggie, who are your favorite writers? And in romance, outside of romance, who do you want to give a shout out to?
In romance, I would say I still stick with Johanna Lindsay as my favorite. She brought me into the romance genre.
Yeah.
And Roseanne Bittner, she writes Native American romance. She just does a beautiful work of it. Really good research. And Richard Wagamese, my dad introduced me to him. And he has since passed away, but he does nonfiction and fiction. Beautiful author, wonderful work. I could go on and on. Louise Verdich, she is Ojibwe. I can't remember which reserve she's from. She's from the States though, but another good author. Pardon?
Turtle Mountain.
Turtle Mountain. Okay, yeah. She's another good author that again I was introduced to. So, and I have a lot like them coming through my desk all the time because I do a book review once a week at my blog. So I'm constantly getting different types of romance novels that I got to read as well. So I reserve nighttime at bed for reading. So like I said, that's about it.
Okay, great. Well, Marcie, we're going to wind up this question with you since you were, one of the people who got a shout out. Okay, now it's your turn of who do you read for pleasure or fun, or who would you like to recommend?
So, I read in the same way that other people watch Netflix or television. So, it's Stephen King, anything and everything by Stephen King. John Sanford, Lee Child, John Grisham. I mean, some of those crime writers. In the Native world, the Angeline Bowley has a wonderful, Firekeeper's Daughter is just a really hot book out there right now. Linda Rodriguez is a crime writer who really supported me when I initially said, you know, I've got these crime novels. There's 3 up and coming Native writers from the Twin Cities here, Anna Cardone, Tasha Hart, and Ruth Denny, that I will be looking forward to seeing what I was just at a reading that they all did on Friday night. So looking forward to seeing where they get published. And Tasha she wants to do romance. And I already sent her your link, Maggie.
Oh, that's
Oh,
wonderful.
sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to talk to her. Glad to read her books.
Cool. Oh, hey, let's make these connections. I'm good for that. Okay, we are coming up on the end of our time here together. And I know that I have failed to ask the questions that should be asked. I always do. So this is going to be where y'all get your soapbox. What would you like to add on any topic as we close out the panel? I'll start that with you, Maggie. What would you like to add, if there's anything?
Just you can reach me at maggieblackbird.com. Everything about me is on that website.
Okay, well, we'll go back to that. But, you know, this is also, if there's anything that a question you'd like to address, anything you'd like to ask each other, that's good. Okay, Drew, what about you? Anything you'd like to add? Any question that you feel we haven't addressed? Or
Well, not
something
so
you
much
want to
that, but
talk
I think I'm really delighted to be on this panel with these people, because this is one of the things I've been talking and lecturing about for God knows how long. That I mentioned earlier about how the contemporary Native literary renaissance, and it used to be that there were basically 3 narratives coming out of the Indigenous community writers. There were historical narratives, victim narratives, and something I call post-contact stress disorder stories. And I was always sort of like, it was basically the same things over and over again, the trauma porn, which we're all familiar with. And I've often talked about how in the last 10, 20 years, there's been a gradual shift towards genre fiction, where Native people are picking up the genre torch and indigenizing it, culturally appropriating all these different types of genre fiction. A friend of mine put together a book of international Indigenous erotica, right? Which I like to think of as 50 Shades of Red. So I just think it's so cool that we're here talking about this, because this is exactly the direction I thought Indigenous literature needed to go.
Cool. Okay, great. Marcie, what about you? You know, anything you'd like to add? Any topic you wish to address? And
So
we will get around to the websites and the blogs, because I want to know that blog address, Maggie, when we get to you.
So when I was growing up, again, being a writer was 0 on the radar for me as a Native person. I mean, I wasn't going to amount to anything, let alone be a writer. And so I think the thing that I want anybody watching this to know as a Native person is that there's a whole world out here if you want to write. And the publishers in New York, regional publishers, they are all looking for Native stories at this point in time. And, you know, I was just on a call the other day with a publisher, and they were looking for a Native romance. And I said, you know, I fail at it every time I try to write it. So don't look at me. But, you know, we need diverse voices, our own voices. There's the Quelly conference that happens every year. There's these residencies that pop up for Native writers to get together. And, you know, like I didn't have any of that. It was 5 years and pile of rejections before I found a publisher. But there are other people who've been through some of these programs where there's doors that are open. And I would just really, really want Native people to rush for those doors. I guess that's what I want to say.
Cool. Cool. That's good. David, what about you? Any closing thoughts? Anything that you wanted to talk about and I screwed up? Go for it.
Well, I'll just kind of piggyback off of Marcie and Drew's comments on the way that the literary landscape is changing, especially for Native writers. I have seen, both in Canada and here in the US, that genre work is becoming more and more accepted. You know, I mean, just here on this panel, we've got people doing romance, we've got people doing crime, we've got horror, you know, and for a long time, we weren't respected. There weren't, you know, the really respected Native writers were the serious ones that were doing literary realism. And it seemed like, you know, they were the only ones that were getting published, that were getting, you know, the attention. I think that's changing. And I think it's a good thing, you know. And so if anybody is watching this, any Native writers or non-Native writers, you know, if you love your genre, I urge you to keep writing in it, but especially to any Native folks who might be, you know, emerging Native writers. If you love it, doors are opening. My partner is the Native writer, Erica Worth. She just sold a big Indigenous horror novel to one of the big five press. You know, she got a big deal, you know, and I don't know that would have been possible, you know, even 5 years ago. You know, the doors are opening for Indigenous genre. And I want to, you know, piggyback on what Marcie said. I urge people, if you're a Native genre writer or not, to apply to these residencies and these programs. I did a month at the MacDowell Colony. It was fantastic. But as I looked around me, I didn't see any other genre writers. Everybody was like writing big, serious stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm writing my crime, you know, with guns and cattle prods and all that, you know, and I hope that people out there will not feel, I suppose, intimidated and apply to the mentorship programs, the residencies. You know, our work is really needed and really important. So genre writers, keep at it.
Cool. Okay, now we're going to do the closer, which is always, you know, what's your current work?
Could I make a comment about that?
Go right ahead.
For my own statement, yeah, we do need more Native romance writers.
Yes.
I've sat on different things with CBC News, with Native America Calling, and they would always ask me, do you know any other Native romance writers? And I would say, no, I don't. And the panel was always very, sometimes just me, or maybe somebody else. So, you know, it's out there, you know, people want to read it, just not Native people too, but, you know, all of North America and around the world. You know, I have one reader from Poland who just loves, you know, reading that. So, so yeah, if you like romance, and please write it. I'll read it.
Yeah.
I wrote an elder's love story once as a play.
Good. Cool. There we go.
All right. Okay. Well, now we do want to get to the parts that will allow people to find you, which is always our closing thing. So Maggie started to give us your website and also give us the address of your blog and any social media, and also tell us what work can people find on the shelves that's yours right now. You know, what's your current book? Where can they find it, and where can they find you?
Okay, yeah, they can find me at maggieblackbird.com. Everything is there, from my bookshelf to my About Me page, my blog, all my social media sites. So anything you want to know about me, it's all there.
Great.
Yeah,
okay.
And my latest book is Night Moves. It is the third book in the When We Were Young series. It's a two-spirit young adult romance. So if you like that,
yeah,
check it out.
Yeah. Cool. David, what about you? What, you know, is Winter Counts your current novel, and where can folks find it and find you?
Yeah, this is the current novel. There is a sequel. So this is out from HarperCollins, and I am working on a sequel. I do have a contract for a sequel that I'm working on right now. I also have some short stories with the characters from Winter Counts. One of them will be in a volume called Midnight Hour, coming out from Crooked Lane Books in November. Another one will be in the BoucherCon anthology, the big crime conference, called This Time for Sure. I've got another Virgil story, and I've already mentioned the Denver Noir. And so the sequel is coming out as well. My website, davidweiden.com, and Twitter @Wambley Weiden.
Okay, great. Drew?
My 34th book is coming out in September, and it's a collection of essays by people exploring Indigenous futurisms, where we will be in 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now. It's called Me Tomorrow. And then hopefully in another 6 months after that, my new novel will be out, my native horror novel called Cold. And most recently, running right now on the Aboriginal People's Television Network up here in Canada, is a 13-part half-hour series I co-produced, co-wrote, and host, called Going Native. And it explores the wild, the wacky, the fabulous, the interesting aspects of Indigenous culture across Canada and the States. I have a website called drewhaydentaylor.com, and my Twitter is @the_DH_Taylor.
Okay, great. And Marcie, what's your current work that people can find, and where can they find you on the web?
So I have the 2 crime novels. The most recent one is Girl Gone Missing. The first one was Murder on the Red River. They're in bookstores. I'm working on a present day crime novel, 2 books that's set in present time. These ones are back before DNA and cell phones.
Mhm.
And
The before times.
one should come out like in a year, I believe. What else? I just had a stage reading of a play called Sweet Revenge about a Native woman serial killer that
Ooh,
I'm looking for a theater to do a stage actual production of that one. We just had the stage reading. Yeah, I am terrible at knowing what I'm doing and promoting myself. I'm bad at it. So that's what I remember.
okay.
I am marcierendon.com. I'm on Facebook under Marcie Rendon, on Twitter under Marcie Rendon, Instagram under Marcie Rendon. Just like keep it easy for myself.
Cool.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all, really. This has been a great panel. And I hope you'll join us again at ConTinual, and I hope you out there viewing this panel will join us again at ConTinual, the never-ending convention. Meanwhile, take care, stay safe, and keep reading.
Thank you.